Is the light too bright on top? Is it?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Let me try to turn one off.
Okay, Jacob, you're live. You can start, inshallah. Jacob, you can get started.
Okay. Welcome to another CAIR-Philadelphia webinar. My name is Jacob Bdier, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the nation's largest and preeminent Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in the country. Today's webinar is called Stories from Palestine, and it is an effort to give voice to those Palestinians living in exile in the greater Delaware Valley and how they are coping with the events of the past 3 weeks in Palestine. This webinar is decidedly not a contribution to the debate between Israel and Hamas. For in my opinion, and the opinion of over 150 countries in the United Nations, there is no longer any debate about the justice of the Palestinian people's right to live as a free nation. Today's guests are 4 Palestinian activists: Sireen Sawalha from Princeton, Mohammed Lami, Mazen Khalil, and Khalil Bdier. So I'd like to start with Khalil Bdier. And if you could tell me a little bit about your family's background and how they reacted to the events of the last 3 weeks.
Well, I thought you were starting with Mazen Khalil, but it's fine. Do you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I prefer if you Mazen start, and then I will follow up, because you can tell, a more compelling stories. How about that?
Okay.
I don't want to start with a complicated, background. Let's start
No,
with a simple one.
Let's hear what you have to say. Yours is more actually, since you're
Yeah.
the 1938, I know that. So that yours is more interesting. We'll follow up and we'll continue.
Okay. So, my large family, the Bdiers, live mostly in Kufr Qasim, which is within the border of 1948, what's called Israel these days. It's close to Jaffa, Tel Aviv, it's 30 minutes drive or 1 hour from Jerusalem. And we adopt names based on when we start to be ruled by the Israeli, So people call us also Arabs 1948, because we were occupied, we became, part of Israel when it was created in 1948, unlike people from the West Bank and Gaza, where they call them 1967. We define ourselves as Palestinians. If you ask me personally, Palestinians, we are part of the larger Palestinian people. And the fact is that we are Israeli citizens. So my family has, Israeli passports. The last events, the last 3 weeks before we got to that, they try to put us in the corner, like you have to choose between being a Palestinian or Israeli citizenship. And I'm talking about people that live there, They put them in a very complicated situation. People went to the street, not because Hamas called them to go to the street, they went to the street because they care about Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah. They care about being third or fourth citizens, like discrimination, about housing, about a lot of things going inside Israel, although we carry the Israeli passport, or Israeli citizenship, but we are not treated the same. Just to give you one example, history, with the creation of Israel, there was around 1 million Palestinians, 950,000 in Palestine, mandatory British ruled Palestine. With the creation of Israel, 700,000 were forced out, and around 150,000 stayed. They didn't leave, despite all what happened. They were trying to get rid of the whole, but some people call us collateral damage. It's like, nobody intended to leave us there, but we stayed. And they didn't. Ben Gurion at that time, they didn't know what to do with us. So they implemented a martial law, military government, based on citizen, not or based on race. So it's not area where there's some military activity and you declare military rules. It's if you are Arab, you are under a military rule, meaning strict or limit movement, no access to hospitals, to jobs, unless you go and ask for permission from an officer. And I do have some documents from my dad. I wasn't born at that time. And that situation kept going until 1966. So they raised, just to be personal, like, if you tell my first generation, my dad, my mom, they're scared. They don't want us to be active. They don't want, I went to the demonstration in Philadelphia and my mom is like, careful, don't put anything in Facebook, we need you to come back to visit, And they succeed with this generation, but they think that they don't know that things changed. The new generation is totally different. My kids is different than me and I'm different than my parents. And I'm not talking about all education. This, they call it a stamp. They want to stamp our brain, and mentality make us accept whatever they want. They want to design us in a way that they want it. And I think they failed in this.
Question.
Yeah.
Of course, many people in the States get upset when the A word is used, apartheid, to describe the state of Israel. And yet it seemed to me that the military government, when I first learned about it, was an exact duplication of what was taking place in South Africa, where one part of the population lived under one set of rules and another population lived under a different set of rules. And they were facing the justice system with completely different expectation and background.
Yeah, and this situation is still ongoing in the West Bank now. So people, they don't see a real court, in the West Bank when they arrest them. They take them to a military officer who has no background in anything except that he's an officer, military. It's a joke. But yes, and it started from the beginning, and it ended in 1966. That's a lot of time. During this time, they took over land. So you can use military laws, Ottomanic law, British laws that serve the purpose, take over land, confiscate land, I'll give you one example, Kufr Qasim, and this is based on stories, even if you have documents, doesn't matter, my family used to own land close to Bet Tikva, which is the only river in the area. They're called Nahr al-Auja, we used to have land there, belongs to the family, We lost all this land. And just to finish up with the story of Kufr Qasim, so in 1956, Israel, France, and Britain launched a war against Egypt. And at that time, Hamas didn't exist, Fatah didn't exist, nothing. And we were, from 1948 to 1956, supposedly citizens of Israel. Well, Kfar Qasim located on the border, really on the green line next to the West Bank. And at that time, West Bank was under Jordanian rule. So they, in 1956, when they started the war, they declared a curfew. They came to Kfar Qasim, the triangle, and the military declared a curfew. So nobody allowed after 3 or 4 p.m., I don't remember the exact hours, to leave the house. And the Mukhtar, or the mayor of Kfar Qasim, you know, he told them, how about the people that are working in your fields and working in their fields, but also working in your manufacturers and field? They come after 3. They told him, don't worry, we'll take care of them, the officer. And they did. So they did what's called Kfar Qasim massacre. They have the soldiers at the entry of the Kfar Qasim. It was a small village at that time, like 1,500 people only. Any car that comes with people in it, they will stop it, line them up, civilians coming, you know, women, children. And in the words that they used, the officer will tell the orders, harvest them. Harvest means shoot. Then, you know, they will leave the bodies, move forward, so people that are coming don't see the killed people, and stop another car. They killed 49 people, including my uncle. You know, and we have a Memorial Day every year for Kfar Qasim massacre. It's one of the famous one at that time. On a personal level, I wasn't born at that time in 1956, but I know it first from my family, and because we keep those memories, and second, because my dad and my mom has to raise the kids of my uncle, the orphans. And I will end up, you know, I will end at this story, you know, without going into too much politics and stuff. So there's a lot of discrimination, but I think within Israel or Palestine, you know, a new generation is different, you know, for good and bad, compared to the old generation. You know, I see a lot of good things, and I see bad things also going on. I'm talking about our community.
One should note that the soldiers responsible for the massacre were all found guilty and sentenced to many years in prison. After 1 year, not a single one was still in prison. They were all pardoned and let go.
That's true. One of them died last year, the old guy, he was 95. His name is Shidmi, you know, and he's famous because he was fined. He didn't even go 1 year to jail. He was fined with the el-Kirish. El-Kirish is like, I don't know, 5 cents, you know? So it's famous, Shidmi Kirish, you know, that's what he has to pay. And they forced, I'm telling you, the old generation, they scared them to death, you know, from the Nakba, for everything. They forced people that live in Kfar Qasim after the massacre, you know, to accept a sulha and to slaughter lambs, you know.
You got frozen there. So
they sent the lambs to Kfar Qasim, the military, and poor guys at that time, they signed, they cannot, you know, take it to court, ask for compensation or anything.
So thank you, Khalil, for that, for the story.
While I don't want to use.
So move ahead to the year 2002. The second Intifada has broken out. Israeli military forces are on their way to Jenin in north of the West Bank. a city where Sireen's family was living. What happens?
Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jacob, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to and see all of you. Peace be upon all of you guys. And yeah, I was born and raised in the West Bank in a small village called Kufurai, 20 minutes from Jenin. I left and got my education in Jordan and then moved to the US. And I lived first Intifada. I was one of those people who lived throwing rocks in the Israeli soldiers. So when we left, I kind of left a couple of young brothers who took over in the first Intifada. And one got injured, left the country for treatment, never went back. The youngest one got arrested, and which is Iyad. Ended up spend almost 9.5 years in prison as a young high schooler. Sadly, Iyad was sentenced to 120 years. And with the help of a couple of lawyers, with the help with the BLO to put his name with after the Oslo Agreement, Iyad was released in September 9, 1999. Even his sentence was 120 years, which is, we know how the Israeli are sentencing young children, thousands of them in prison, extensive, long period of time. Iyad was released. I was living here in the US, working in the UN. Of course, it was a big celebration for us. It reminds me of what happened in Ramallah and the funeral for Fadi today in Ramallah, where my niece from Dubai, Dania, texts me today with picture of his funeral and says, "Auntie, this is remind me of Khalu Iyad." And it's true, my brother Iyad came out of prison within short period, 2002. Jenin was under 15 days. It was Ramadan even. It did not cross my mind, to tell you the truth, thereafter my brother Iyad. We talked in the beginning of the first day of Ramadan. It was the Ramadan 4th, November 9th, Ramadan the 4th. And saying, Happy Ramadan. Hopefully next year we'll be together. I spoke with him for 35 minutes, normal conversation. And then that night, the next day, I wake up in Al Jazeera actually announcing Israeli bombed the house and killed inside it my brother Iyad. And this is not the first time Israel being aggressive against Palestinian citizens. During that time, they bombed and killed more than 70 young Palestinian in the Jenin refugee. Iyad was not in Jenin refugee, it was in Jenin, in that downtown city. And Iyad, as any young man, newly married, I think it was like 45 days, almost 50 days after his wedding, wake up his new bride to make suhoor, and he heard sounds and activities around him. And he was surprised what's going on. He asked her to dress up and be ready, finish suhoor. Within few minutes, the house was bombed, and I felt like the media in the US, the media coverage did not do any fair to Iyad or to what was going on with my family. Going back before even the house was bombed and Iyad was killed, Iyad, after he was released, was target for a few months and came a couple of times to research and violently breaking doors and windows to my mom and my father, who was lost his leg for diabetes. He was in crutches and wheelchair. And they will like really aggressively get them out of the house 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, breaking doors and windows, looking for Iyad. They did not know that Iyad is not living with us, he's living in his own home. Until one day came in, asked everybody to leave. My youngest sister was still in elementary school. The oldest one was in high school. My father, without even letting them take any of their belongings. They were literally barefoot with their nightgown. And my father begged my sister, who was high schooler, to walk in and ask them for his wheelchair or even his dentures for his teeth. And she walked in, she saw wires and bombs all around the 2-floor storehouse. And she asked the Israeli soldier, what's going on? Can you please just give us the stuff for my father? And the answer was, this is the house your mom has birthed to Iyad Sawalha? And she says, yeah, my mom has 13 kids. We're 13 children. And the answer was, we're 13. This is not just Iyad Sawalha house. And it's not just the house Iyad lived. The house my mom and my father and the rest of my family lived was bombed. So kicked her out, and within few minutes, the bomb happened, and then they pulled out of the village and left my family homeless in the street. Homeless in the street. Of course, not allowing my sister to take any of my father walker or crutches or wheelchair or anything. Thank God the neighbors were allowed to get to rescue them a few hours after the Israeli soldier pulled out of the town and took them shelters to different houses. And me, I wake up to a phone call and my husband is answering and I said, no, she doesn't know yet. And then I looked to Al Jazeera and here is the announcement. And I ran to my phone, calling my house. And then suddenly I realized the house is bombed. There is no phone. How can I reach my family? So I stayed all day just I could not even believe it, that this is happening. It's not just punishment to Iyad. And if Iyad was an activist, no, it was punishment to his mother and father, all his brother and sister. So when Iyad was killed, my brother was in Nablus and he heard the news and he taking a taxi to Jenin. In the checkpoint between Nablus and Jenin, was arrested, thrown to prison. And he was told exactly, he said, can I please let me out just to walk in my brother's funeral? And the answer was, if you see what happened to your brother and to the house, you will be one day asking for revenge and you will become a suicide bomber. My younger brother spent 2 years and 8 months in prison with no sentence. And then one day my mom is doing something in the kitchen and somebody's knocking in the door and he said, oh, they just throw me next to the closest checkpoint. Nothing against him other than his brother was killed. So for all over these years, until now, every time I travel to Palestine, of course, through Jordan, even I'm an American citizen, I'm not allowed to travel through Tel Aviv. Until now, every time I travel, I'm in the checkpoint. I'm telling you, last time 18 hours with my 3 children who are born and raised in New York, in the US, carrying American citizen. They treat them so badly, questioning us. Sometimes they put me for hours and hours just sitting in front of a flat glass. I don't even know who's in the other side. And just to interrogate me and ask me how long I'm staying and why I'm here. And the answer always, this is my home. This is my home. Yes, you bombed the 2 houses, the house Iyad lived in and the house my mom and dad, and 2 years later, we were able to build a new house in a different neighborhood, but this is my home. So this is what the Israeli has been doing to us who are Palestinian with citizenship. Then after that, my dad's health deteriorated. He has a green card holder. I brought him to the US, got sick, died here. I was not allowed. I called the Israeli consulate and I begged, I want his wish to come true. He wants to be buried next to his son in Jenin. And the question was not, and ended up my father being buried here in the US. So for us, a Palestinian, we don't have the right to return when we are alive. We don't have the right to return when we died overseas. And when we try to visit our family, they try to interrogate us for hours and hours and hours so they can tell us, don't come back anymore. I don't know why you're back. And that's how I feel. When my kids were young, they will cry, they don't want to go back. And now they're older, they understand the message Israeli government has been given to us Palestinians who live overseas not to come back. And this has been going on. Iyad was killed 2002. And until now, as a family, we're still paying the price since 2002 that every time I am not allowed even to Jerusalem. As a Palestinian, until now, if I try in the checkpoint in Ramallah to enter to Jerusalem, the answer always, do you have a visa and your American passport? And then, oh, you have Hawiyya, you're not allowed. So for me, I never been allowed, neither me or my children, to either fly to Tel Aviv airport or allowed even to enter to Jerusalem to visit the Aqsa Mosque. So it's been difficult for people in 1948, for people in Gaza, for people in the West Bank, for people who lost loved one like me, and still the Israeli interrogate me left and right and prohibited me from freedom of moving around every time I travel. So that's I feel like the story of every Palestinian. 9 years visiting him in jail, and all the tortures and the hardship my family went through and he went through. In the end, we pay a heavy price. And actually, we paid a heavy price before. My father, born in Nazareth, and 1948, immigrated to Jenin, ended up, could not live, went to Dubai. And for the rest of our life, I lived all my life. My father is coming over the summer just to visit us, because my mom stayed in Palestine with us, and my father became a refugee, basically, who is allowed once a year to come and see his children in Jenin. So it's just the history of us. One brother in Moscow, one sister in Saudi Arabia, one sister in Dubai. I am here, one brother in Ohio. We all around the world, because we are not safe or welcome to go and visit our family whenever we want. I have brother and sister who's really afraid to visit because of what could happen to them. And every time I speak, the first thing they tell me, are you sure? Especially my mom, like I think Khalil was saying about how your parents are fearing of, please don't walk in demonstration and don't rally. When I did the demonstration, the rally in Princeton last week, my family were really so scared, because this summer, my plan is to go and visit. And they're so fearing of what could happen to me. There is a book is going to be published by me. We wrote a book about my life story, and Stanford University signed a contract with me 3 months ago to publish it. And my family are so scared if the book is published with all my story from 1967 until now, that I will be never allowed back to visit them or see them.
One of the, thank you very much for that moving tale. One of the things that American Jews like myself had to come to grips with was this history. When we first heard it, of course, it was, it seemed like fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we read and the more we visited, the internal defense of the state of Israel began to crumble when faced with the reality of the history that we took upon ourselves to learn. And when we learned about the Nakba, when we learned about the laws after 1948 that led to the expropriation of hundreds of thousands of dunim, transferring the native Palestinians out of their villages and repopulating them with Jewish immigrants. This began to change that situation in the minds of many of us. There's a wonderful movie called Knowledge is the Key, and it's a story of Edward Said, the late, great Palestinian scholar and professor of literature at Columbia University, and Daniel Barenboim, a Argentinian Jew who ends up in Israel. And the two of them form this relationship and a friendship. And one of the results of that is that Barenboim is severely criticized by Israeli press, by the Israeli government, for speaking out about the human rights violations which are rampant in the West Bank. So your story is not unique. Your story is the story of the Palestinian people. And the latest episode of that story took place in the last couple of weeks in Gaza. And I wanted to ask Mazen.
Sorry, Jacob, can I add something about what you said with the Nakba? In 1967, when the war happened, I was 1 year old and my mom was in Jordan, Amman, trying to call my father that summer want to come to Amman to see her. And she was going to see him. And she saw in the news that we lost the war. And she like, I'm going to be a refugee like my husband? No way. And you know what she did? She took us, 3 young girls, and walked back. So she can be counted and not to lose the land and the house. And the day the house was bombed, she said something which is really stick to me. I wish I never came back. I wish I stayed, lived in Jordan the rest of my life in refugee. At least I would not lose my child and I could not lose my house, the one I raised all my children in it. So it came to her many years later, regretting all her life, was so proud that she came back, even that caused her to be separated from her husband who come once a year. And that's explained the 12 children, by the way, the 13 children. He used to come just only once a year that summer. And that's the only time she was united with him. She raised the children by herself. She took care of the land. She farmed, she raised children, and she made sure all of us have college and higher education by herself. So she struggled all her life, but in the end, she paid a heavy price for coming back.
But still, people remain committed and struggled for the land. I learned about the word samud, steadfastness, and rooted in the blood and struggle that the Palestinian people have shed to be able to reclaim one day their rights and their property and their homes. Mazen? What was your first reaction when you heard about the attack on Al-Aqsa?
Well, I mean, it was getting uglier and uglier. So my first reaction wasn't like a shock. You know, I was seeing it on a daily basis. You know, nowadays with social media and TikTok and Snapchat and Facebook, you could see things on ground. It's like you're living there in Jerusalem, in the old city. If you follow certain people, you could actually see certain things that maybe the people that live in this in the old city want to even see. So I wasn't really shocked that much, but the time, exactly. I mean, the time they chose to do this, and Laylatul Qadr, you know, the most holiest night of Ramadan. It's like they're sparking a fire. You know, they just wanted something to happen, I guess, for Netanyahu to stay in office or whatever. So it wasn't that much of a shock. But what I really want to mention, and let me just go back to where I left the Palestinian territory back in Palestine when I was a little kid in elementary school. I was only like 13 years old when I moved in the first Intifada. Those days were like the ugliest days, let me say, and was kind of fun days for us young kids when we used to throw rocks on the cars and on soldiers, and my family were so scared. That's why they actually kind of brought us here and took us away from those days, because every time we tried to go to school, there was like either protest or there was a closure. So it wasn't, there was no school. We would go to school for a day, and then a fight, you know, like a protest would break out, and tear gas and rubber bullets. And then in the end, it was live bullets. So everybody was scared, especially where we lived outside of Ramallah, close to Beit El and Ofra, which is settlements. So it wasn't that fun. And let me just mention, you know, they kept on saying, they will forget, you know, they would live and forget, and the young will forget. We actually got so strong, not that we forgot. You know, I got here once again when I was 14 years old. Those days where, you know, you would want to play and you would want to try to finish high school and forget about where you came from. You know, living in the US, it wasn't like living in Palestine with the occupation, with the tear gas, with the soldiers, with the checkpoints. It wasn't that fun of days, you know, back there. And coming to the States once again, it's all fun, it's all games, it's all like, you know, you go to McDonald's, you don't see things like we did see in Palestine. But, you know, with my story, let me say, we didn't forget. I didn't forget. I actually got stronger. I would want to go back to Palestine 2 or 3 times a year. And now it's been like 20 years. I mean, it's been like 30 years that I have moved here. But for the last 20 years, I've been going back to Palestine almost 3 to 4 times a year. And my kids I would take them every summer to get to know their village, to get to know their land, to see exactly what we go through and where we came from. So our story didn't end back in 91, or didn't end because we came here. And let me just say, you know, with the shocking of what happened in the last few weeks, it's the spotlight that Palestinians and Palestine itself got on, you know, especially with the protests. You would see, and I went to Princeton, you know, I guess, and you were there, Jacob. I mean, it was 90% non-Palestinians. And let me just say, there are Palestinians, but they're non-Arabic speaking, because everyone that came out that day, either in Princeton or Philadelphia, and I'll go back to Philly in a minute, you know, they were not Palestinians by, let's say, native Palestinians, but by coming out, they are Palestinians, and they're truly, you know, coming up to the cause and showing up. So 90% of non-Arab Palestinians, that's a huge difference right now. You know, for those to come out and to leave their work, to leave their family, to leave their children, and to leave everything they're doing and to come out and stand even for 1 hour, that makes a big difference. That makes us, you know, stay and stand strong again. And that changed, the whole thing changed. You know, we would go to protest back in maybe 15, 20 years ago, and we would find like maybe 100 or 200 Palestinians that we had to call, or we had to like send buses to get them. Right now, and I'll go back to Philly right now, the first protest, it was like almost 5,000 to 6,000 people. And let me mention this again, more than 60, 70%, a lot of American Jewish, a lot of Christians, a lot of Asians, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of black people, you name it, they were there. And plus with the Palestinian community in Philly, so it was the most strongest protest I ever seen. I lived in Philadelphia and the surrounding area for almost 31 years right now. I never seen the support that we got in the last few weeks. And last Saturday, I was actually in.
You mentioned my granddaughter?
Yeah.
She came to the protest in Philadelphia. She's 9 months old, you know.
Yes, I know. I've seen her. So in Washington, D.C., we're talking about almost 30,000 people that came out. And it was a very rainy day. It was a very cold day. Even it was like almost June, but it was very bad weather. So things are changing. Let me tell you, things are changing. And to see those kids that got killed in Gaza on the first page of New York Times, that's, you know, you could never see this before. So I guess the American public and the American people right now are really changing their thoughts, and they're really digging and searching about the Palestinian-Israeli issue conflict. And let me just not say conflict, because we're just under occupation. We're the only country that's still under occupation until right now. And let's go back what really started this. Not only the you know, going into the Al-Aqsa Mosque on end of Ramadan, and also the Sheikh Jarrah, what they're talking about, you know, the Israelis, or let's say one of the rabbi owns this land, and they use the court system to, you know, to try to take it back, and they won the court, and now they're trying to evacuate the Palestinians that lived there for 50 or 60 years through the court system. I mean, I don't know why can't the Palestinians, just like her and her dad, where they lived in Nasra. Not only that, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that still hold the deed. They still hold the deed of their land. And some of them even still holding the key, you know, the key for the door, you know, the key for the door for their houses. Why can't they use that system? Why can't they use the court in you know, Israeli court to try to get back their land and try to get some of the land, or try to get the villages that was demolished? You know, Palestinians live there. They have a proof of that. They have a proof of, as I say, titles or you know, the keys for their houses and their land, and their, you know, old ladies would go back to their villages and just mention, oh, that's where I lived. That's the house that I lived in. That's the tree I was born under, let's say, you know, but they cannot use that system. It's only for Israelis. So, you know, you tell me then. And not only that, let me mention one more thing, which is very important. In Jerusalem, you know, 93% for the resident of Jerusalem, either Palestinians or Israelis or whatever you want to call them, or Arab Israelis, 93% that gets a permit to build on a Jerusalem-owned land are Israelis and Israeli settlers that comes from, God knows, from Brooklyn, New York, or somewhere in Europe, and they would allow them to, to build and, to improve the housing. 93%, only 7% out of the 100 are Palestinians that had to hire God knows how many attorneys and lawyers just to get a permit to build on, and it's very, very, very costly. And you have to prove 100 proofs that you own this land and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to build. So I mean, it's obvious. I mean, it's you could see it. It's nothing to hide anymore. So people are really coming out and talking, and nothing is hidden anymore. It's simple as that. I mean, you could see the media changing. I mean, you could never see Fox News talking about Palestinian in the favor of Palestinians, these days, or just what I mentioned, or the New York Times, showing those kids that got killed, So talking about Hamas and whatever, that has nothing to do. You don't just spark something and then you blame somebody else that, you don't just do that. So here we go again. They settled the war and they stopped the war. Did they demolish Hamas? Did they stop? Are they going to stop the rockets? Hell no. That's not going to stop nothing. If they start another war again, guess what? And this guy, he mentioned 1,111. So I guess that's 1,111 missiles that's going to probably fly out of Gaza in one day. We don't want to, I'm not assuming that's going to happen or whatever. I wish the war was, would never start again. That's not our intention, of course. But, they keep on demolishing houses. They keep on demolishing buildings. They keep on killing kids and civilians. For what? Saying they're, they use the humans as a human shield. That's not true.
Mazen,
yes.
One of the sad facts is that even when Palestinians took their cases to the court and the court ruled in their favor, nothing changed on the ground.
They will not.
Authorities totally
Can I
ignored
add something? It's important for the audience to hear that.
Khalil.
By Israeli law, the right to claim your property if you have papers in Jerusalem is only for Jewish. So even before the creation of Israel, so the Sheikh Jarrah example, I'm not sure that it's true, but by Israeli law, if the organization, the right-wing organization that trying to take over those houses has papers to show that from 1876, during the Ottoman Empire, a Jewish family owned that place, they're allowed by law to claim it. And as Mazen mentioned, if you go to Katamon in Jerusalem, the family is still in East Jerusalem. They were displaced, the wealthy Arab back in Jerusalem. They have the papers, they have the keys, but they're not allowed by law, to claim it, to take it to the court. I'll give you one example very fast. And again, I'm talking about 1948. We have Christian Palestinians also. We're not all Muslims, There is a village next to Lebanon called Kufr Bar'am and a Jish. In 1948, 49, they didn't even resist. It's a small village in the mountains, really next to the border of Lebanon. So the army came and told them, we need you to leave. We have to clean the area from terrorists. Just leave the houses to this Christian small village for 1 week. And guess what? And they gave them a paper. They never returned. They went to the court. They took it to the highest court, to the Supreme Court. The court ruled for them. They're not going to add any Palestinian to the Israelis. They already Israeli citizens, but they are living in Al-Jish. They have their church, which is 5 minutes walking from Al-Jish. They have their houses, they have their farms, but they don't want to create, how do you call it in English?
Precedent.
Yeah, they don't want to create that somebody got to return to their house, even if the court ruled that. That's one example. My friend And my classmates, 2 of them came from that village, you know.
In Hebrew, the names of the villages are Biram and
Kufr, Biram, and the village next to it, that people that used to live in Kufr Biram, they lived in El Jish. I don't know how to write it in English, but in Hebrew, Biram, without Kufr.
Mm-hmm.
If you Google it, you will find it.
Right. Again, this is just one example of the continual ethnic cleansing which is taking place since 48 onward. Sireen, do you have any close? We're getting close to the end of our time.
Yeah, when Mazen was talking about people leaving, I remember first time, 1971, first time my father came back from the Gulf, and he took me with my grandfather to Nazareth. And it was the first I was 4 years old, and seeing my father going back from 1948 for the first time to his home in Nazareth. And it's not just that, his older brother, Abdullah, who was newly married, did not leave. And I still remember how my father feeling when the first time he was able to hug his brother, who did not see since 1948. As a young child, I was the only one who went with my dad. I still even remember the house, the garden around the house. I still even remember the meal they fed us. So imagine, in that time, for a 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old, I did not even understand my father feeling and why my father is crying this much. And this is how, and then that was the last time he saw his brother. His brother died. My father was still working in the Gulf. And this is the story of many Palestinian family who were separated in 1948. So it's not just we lost our home in 1948 in Nazareth. Again, the Israelis following us in our land in the West Bank, while everybody has a good piece of land, it's becoming a settlement. We're forgetting. And when people says, oh, Hamas, let's take Hamas out of the equation. What's going to happen with the right to return? What's going to happen to millions and thousands of Palestinians in refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan? What's going to happen to the checkpoints, and the wall was built and divided us. The wall, which is really make it very difficult for so many kids even to get to their schools or to see their other part of family. The wall took lands and cut Persians' families and separate them from each other. What's going to happen to thousands of prisoners, who young kids and women who spending years and years, the best year of their life in prison? And Israel will dismantle all these settlements, who are really taking the best, most strategic land in the West Bank. A settler can come in to Nablus, to Jenin area, to Tulkarem, to Ramallah, and just put his trailer there and claim it as a land, and the Israeli soldiers will protect him.
Sireen,
will protect him.
Sireen, one question.
Go ahead.
Our fourth guest, who is unfortunately didn't get in until now, I feel obligated in welcoming Mohammed Lami. If you could contribute to this conversation, we'd be very happy.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob.
And my apologies that you were out.
No worries. It happens. I'm glad I'm able to join and contribute to this conversation. I want to start by saying thank you and giving my appreciation to the panelists and to the attendees. I think that these conversations are really important to the ultimate cause. I wish I had the same experiences as some of the other panelists, but I think it was, I bring some value with a different perspective. And for me, the perspective has always been, I was born in Jordan and I've lived in the United States my entire life. And so I've never visited Palestine until about 2 years ago. And I want to talk about that experience, but I think it's very important, right? Since we are all here and are US citizens, is to focus on kind of how that tide is turning. And Mazen has alluded to it, right? And it's something, you know, this last couple of weeks have brought some awareness, right, to the community. I think this new generation of voters, right? We mentioned, you know, TikTok and social media and Snapchat and all of these different venues promote Palestine. And it's something that is really, really refreshing. And I think is really important because it takes us away from the traditional news outlets, right? And gives all of us a voice. So I appreciate conversations like this. I appreciate platforms like this. And if I could share a personal story, if I may, I know we're up against time, but you know, growing up here in the United States, I've known Mazen most of my life, and he could attest to it. I considered myself, and I still do consider myself, an American, and I'm a Palestinian-American. And for many years, Palestine was a fairy tale. It was a distant land. I had no connection to it. I was so consumed with my life and my development here, as you can imagine, as a teenager. And it wasn't until later in life, until I heard a very, very important story. And so my mother for years has encouraged me to go back to Palestine and get my Hawiyya, right, my citizenship. And for many years, my mother would nag me and say, we're going this year, you're gonna go do it, you have your number, and you need to go and claim it. And for years I would say, Mom, I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want to go through the hassle. And this is important, right? Because, you know, the other panelists, and I'm sure many other Palestinians are courageous enough to go back and face the music and go through it. And so for me, it was, I don't want it to hassle, right? I don't want to go through the checkpoints, and I don't want to be berated because I'm not, I know my temper, I know my personality, and I will not stay quiet, not for any Israeli soldier or anyone else. So if I felt like I was being mistreated, I may get myself into a lot of trouble. And so for years, I avoided it. And then one day I was speaking with my mother, and my mother is from a town called Ajur, which no longer exists. And so, you know, their village eventually got tore down. And so, and I asked her, you know, to share that story with me. And she said to me that my grandfather wanted to stay behind, didn't want to leave the house. And so my sister is, I mean, my mother had 3 sisters, and so it's her and her sister. So my grandfather was afraid because of the stories that they were hearing about what they were doing to young girls. And my mother at the time was 17 years old. And so my grandfather asked them to go to Jordan. And so they walked. And so from Palestine to Jordan. And it's in, you know, unfathomable to me to try to imagine that. And so finally I decided, you know what, I started to see some of the awareness around Palestine. And that story specifically gave me the courage, right, to go back and get my Hawiyya. And so I said, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go with my mother, and I'm gonna do it. And I don't care what I go through, but I'm gonna do it. And so I'm glad to say that I did it. And most Palestinian Americans that don't have, I call it a privilege to carry a Hawiyya, would say, what do you want with the Hawiyya? You got an American citizen, you can go and fly into Tel Aviv and go wherever you want and go freely throughout the country. And so for me, it was important, and that's why I call it a privilege, because it is a privilege for me to carry that Hawiyya and stand with the people that are oppressed and that are still fighting the fight. And so if I could stand on one side and I have that opportunity, it's important for me to do that. And so I'm glad to say that I did that. And I'm glad to say that, you know, over the last few years, that experience has changed my perspective. And so I've spent a lot of time over the last few years dedicating that to make sure that we create enough awareness in the United States to help support those people that are there.
Thank you, Mohammed. If all of you would like to make like a short closing statement.
I do actually, if I may.
Okay.
I always wanted to tell this story, but I'm actually gonna have it as a huge story. Hopefully CNN or some of the media outlets could actually cover this. You know, we live on a road where this road actually, it's called Jerusalem Road, Tariq al-Quds or Shara al-Quds. What's, you know, how they call it back home. And this road actually comes through my village and into, like, let's say the north side of Palestine and into Jericho and into, you know, if you keep on going, it's Ain Road for those of you that know. That goes through, you know, straight down to Jordan, let's say. And this road connects, as I said, with a few settlements that comes from the Jerusalem side with the settlers. And I'm gonna compare this road to Roosevelt Boulevard for those of you that live in Philly, and I'm sure you guys know Roosevelt Boulevard, Route 1. It's a boulevard, so it's a huge road that Palestinians travel on. So what's really important about the story is, let's say the boulevard has to stop for a side street only for settlers that live in Beit El. Beit El is actually a little settlement. It's not little, it's eating up all the land around it, you know, around Al-Bira, Ramallah, Ain Rud, Batin, those little villages around Beit El. And it's very important for the Israelis, actually, that particular, it holds the main soldier camp for the Israeli, you know, for the IDF. So my main point here is, imagine Roosevelt Boulevard stops for, let's say, one of the little streets, you know, stop sign I'm talking about. You know, we have a stop sign as Palestinians, thousands and thousands of cars stops for just like one or two cars that comes through that settlement, you know? So they don't have a stop sign. They could continue to go, even though it's a little side street. Meanwhile, we have like a highway that we travel on hundreds of cars that go past by every second. They have to stop and let go the Israeli cars into the settlement. I think that's a huge, it's just like, you know, how they would treat the Africans in, you know, South Africa or whatever, you know, back in the days, or the slaves, you know, in Georgia or the Southern at the time of early 1900s. So it's that bad until now, where people not even paying attention to this road. This road means a lot to me. You know, why would we want to stop? We're the main street. Why would a side street, you know, go through with one or two cars? Meanwhile, we have hundreds of cars that has to travel and they have to stop. But of course, it's the way around. It's because the occupation, once again, it's there, the occupation. So I wanted to end with that story, and hopefully I would make a little video about that, and hopefully it would go viral, you know, as the other videos, as Jacob, not you, Jacob, but the other Jacob from Jerusalem, as he said, if I don't steal it, someone else will. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sireen?
So I will add to Mohammed's story. He missed with, you know, when I spoke. Mohammed, I have 3 children, 28, 24, and 19. And as soon as they turn 1 year, before they even have a decision or a say to say, I will take them to Palestine so they can get the Hawiyah. And every time we're in the checkpoint, they regret it and they blame me and they cry that all their friend is flying to Tel Aviv and it's easy for them, and why they have to be tortured for hours and hours. And first demonstration I think I organized myself was against Mayor Giuliani in the 90s, when he did not welcome President Yasser Arafat to Lincoln Center. And I still have in my fresh picture of my son less than 1 year carrying sign and flags. And now, after all of these years of complaining, this is the time I feel my kids are appreciating their carrying the Hawiyah. My kids are more activists. They're pushing me to drive all the way to New York, to Brooklyn, to Manhattan, to the Bronx last weekend for demonstration. So even when they were young, it was a burden for them. I feel now they're more proud and they're speaking up more than even me. So I feel, thanks to all our friends and allies in this country, thanks for social media, that our voice is being, like we're speaking, and a lot of young generation have been supporting to the Palestinian. And then people start seeing what is like the road for settlement. Between Jenin and Nablus, there is one road beautifully paved. And my kids always ask me why we're not in that road, because it's for settlers, and the dirty, rocky road is for the Palestinian to drive in. And literally, while they're not in it, the only thing in it is the stray dogs and cats in the road, if the settlement is not driving. And us, we have to go through all of this dirt and rocky road to connect from one spot to another. And people don't realize that. Even like something small as a Palestinian from Jenin, I want to say it before I leave. We have Marj ibn Amr. It used to be one of the most fertilized land of fruits and vegetables. The best fruits, vegetables come from there. And when you travel now to that part, it's mostly 90% of the land is tobacco. And I asked that question, why? And they said, because the Israeli is like throw, I don't know, 200 bear or pigs in the highways in the road, and they have been multiplying, and they've been eating all the crops for the Palestinian in that part that people don't want to plant anymore, and ended up with just tobacco because that's the only thing they don't eat. And as much as people are been hunting this big birds, still they're multiplying by the 1,000 and the 100 between Jenin and Nablus, and you will be driving in the road and you will see them in the side of the road. That feeling, so many farmers abandoning their land, and they don't even go to the land, fearing of those animals because they're really big and they're scared of them, and Palestinians are not used to them in their land. So it's sad for me when I drive back home and I will be buying fresh cucumber and zucchini and watermelon and taken to my mom boxes in my way, and fruit, peaches and plums. Now all I see in the line of the road is garbage and pigs and birds filling and stray dogs, and the only thing is planting is tobacco. So there is so many things our American and media all around the world don't cover about the struggle the Palestinians live in there, while either with water resources or with agriculture or with checkpoint or with even visiting and seeing each other and crossing borders from one place to another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Khalil?
I will end up in the same spirit, just the second generation, as Mohammed said about the Hawiyah. So we are with Israeli citizenship, and two of my kids were born back home when we came here, and the other two were born here, and I applied for a birth certificate and Hawiyah, Israeli Hawiyah, because I don't want to give anyone excuse to make me leave, whenever I want. By choice I can leave, Kufr Qasim. But when Majid was a teenager, 12, 13, like Muhammad, and we went to visit in the old city of Jerusalem, he was walking behind me, and for all of a sudden, the soldier standing there and picking the youngs, with the mustache. For all of a sudden, I look at my son in the back, and the soldier stopped him with a big M16. And my son is 12, 13. He was scared. So my instinct was, I jumped and I stood in the middle between him and the soldier, because I can speak Hebrew also. And I said, you have nothing to do with my son. You have to talk to me. He said, no, I want to talk to him. I said, no. And I argue with him. Talk to me. If he said, I need his ID, I said, he has no ID. Then in a split of a second, I said, you know what, to the soldier, I'm working on this kid. He's a teenager. To have his, not confused about his identity and the whole conflict things, And I'm working hard, and he's not interested at that age, 12, 13 years old. He just wants to fit in. He wants to be American, You know what? I stood aside and I said, take care of him. Whatever you want to do, now he will know, you are doing me a favor. He will have his identity firm. He will be, and it's a true story, My kids still remember it until these days. So sometimes you got to let it go. If they want to torture your kids, let them do it, It helps. I will end up with that.
Thank you. there's enough in the newspapers and in the press over the last month to make all of us feel at times hopeless and exceedingly sad, with large doses of anger thrown in as well. And yet, when I hear all of you, when I see the large number of people who have come out to the demonstrations in solidarity with the Palestinian people, when I, like you, see the pictures of the murdered children on the front page of the New York Times, and the existence of groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, who does Nakba commemorations. This gives me the evidence that, as Dr. King said, the arc of the universe is long, but it ends in justice. And we will not give up. All of us who are involved in this struggle, whether Palestinian or non-Palestinian, whether Jew or Arab or Christian, one day I am convinced justice will come down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, words from the Old Testament. So again, thank you, all of you, for participating in another CAIR-Philadelphia webinar.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
having
Thank
us.
you, Jacob. You know, let me just
Thank
end with this. You know, we really appreciate you too, as a Jewish American, you know, standing with Palestinians. Hey, I'm me myself, I always talk about you. You know, you're the director of CAIR, you know. Imagine, you know, some people don't get it that way. So it's not a conflict with Palestinians against Jewish, you know. We're just against the Zionists, we're against who steals our land. Simple as that. Otherwise, we live in peace with anyone. Christians, Muslims, Jewish. I have my neighbors as Jewish. They are really nice, cool people. We have nothing against them. And you could tell by, you know, how you be treated, you know, and how your communication with us as Arabs and Palestinians in particular, you know, and we really appreciate you once again. And we love the work that you do and the time that you take out. And we called you last time to be one of the speakers in Princeton, and boom, you showed up. You know, some Arabs or Palestinians wouldn't even, you know, with that short time, you wouldn't even bother coming up there, you know. So thank you, and we appreciate you, and keep it up. We get stronger. We get actually we're stronger with you, you know.
It's my great honor to be here with all of you. And I would say next year, may we all be in a free Palestinian state. Inshallah, and have a big helping of my favorite food in the whole world, kanafe.
Oh,
all right. Well, that's the only one. That's the only dessert they didn't steal yet. Not for anything. You know, they stole the pita bread and falafel and the hummus and baba ganoush. But knafe, so far they didn't claim it yet. They didn't claim.
They're trying the mansaf. Although I think mansaf has never been kosher because it's milk with beef.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that they cannot.
There's no such a thing as Israeli mansaf. You know, I saw it in Facebook. It's like what?
Jacob, I have to make you kinafe. Last year I won #1 prize with Belarus best kinafe.
All right.
Yes, I won the prize.
So did you get the cheese direct from Nablus?
Yeah, I make the cheese at home. You know, I'm a
can put me on
Palestinian. My
that
mom
list.
taught me how to make the cheese at home. So you will have kinafe in my house.
Okay, I look forward, inshallah.
Sorry, thank you all for having us.
Can I just add one closing comment? And I want to end with a call to action. I think it's important to call for action. We have an opportunity to stand on the good side of history, and change and growth is uncomfortable. And so I encourage all of the attendees to build the bravery like I did in my story, and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so we have an opportunity. I think we should capitalize on that. You know, have intelligent conversations with your neighbors, with your friends. You know, anytime I see someone post on social media that they stand with Israel, I take it as an opportunity to have an intellectual conversation with them to change their perspective. And if we can do that, just one person at a time, right?
Yes.
Each father, each mother will have children, and eventually that message will continue to grow. So.
And we have actually tomorrow in Princeton again at 5 o'clock, Princeton Muslim Youth, another rally. So please guys, everybody, if you can attend, you're welcome. I hope to see you there tomorrow.
Salam
All right.
alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Peace be upon all of you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.